Hello, leadership class. Today I'd like to briefly introduce the topic of leadership skills, things that I want every one of you to be aware of and to work on. And you'll probably all work on different ones, and that's just fine. Please note that session 4 is devoted to leadership skills and to building culture and building relationships so that your team can be a high performance team. So I will not repeat all of that. I want to concentrate on leadership skills during session 4, late August, early September. But leadership skills are very important to your leadership journal, and making commitments to addressing your skills is something I want you to do in your journal. So I want to introduce it today and then talk about it in more detail with more examples on session 4, but I want you to be thinking about them. So that's what we're trying to do today. I'll start with a brief discussion of the purpose of leadership skills, why they should be important to you. Then I'll go to sources. How do I know what's a good leadership skill and what isn't? How do I know when one particular skill is useful and maybe another one is less useful? Because to some extent skills are circumstantial. They depend upon where you're leading, where you're working, who you're working with, and a whole variety of other things. I also want to introduce the topic of really the context of leadership skills, even though some of the literature and some of the books place them as primarily important. I view them to be important, but not sufficient to be an excellent leader. Excuse me. They're one of many things that you need to do to get better as a leader. And if this class is about anything, it's about the idea of continuous improvement, always thinking about how you can be a better leader and what you're going to work on next. You may have mastered the first 4 of my 11 leadership skills, but you got 7 more to go, and that's probably just the surface of the question of leadership skills. Finally, I'll just say a few things about my handout called Basic, Advanced, and Executive Leadership Skills, and that's in your handout packet, one of the voluminous sets of materials I am giving to you, and I'm really trying to build your library about leadership. So I'll say a few words about that, but most of the work on those kinds of lists of skills and definitions of skills and hierarchies of skills requires you to work on them. So that's what I want to do today. Let's start with just making sure we know the purposes of this discussion. The primary purpose is to get you thinking about your leadership journal, because it is the most important assignment of the course and one that you'll have to spend some time on. And I think it's made more difficult by the condensed format of this semester. So I'm trying to get you going as quickly as possible on understanding leadership skills. So just know that to do a really good job on your journal requires attention to such things as, what does leadership mean to me? What skills do I currently have, but which ones do I need to work on? Those are the kinds of questions that are in the syllabus that I want you to look at. Another purpose, as I've said, is I don't want you to overemphasize skills. We can all get better at leadership skills, and I very much want you to think about which ones you are going to work on. But they're not sufficient to be a great leader. Other personal characteristics and really strong human values, treating other people fairly, for example, are even more important to being an excellent leader. You can get by at being C-level leader, C+ leader, maybe a B- leader. If you can keep working on your skills and getting them better, that's one requirement, but by themselves they're not sufficient. So I want you to keep that in mind. And I'll give you an example from Steve Ballard. Steve Ballard had a long career. He climbed the ladder from a lowly faculty member to a program director and an administrator, and finally a chief academic officer, not finally, but then a chief academic officer before I became chancellor. So most careers are like that. They require numerous steps on the ladder to get where you ultimately want to be. And early in my career, or midway through my career, when I started talking with mentors and other people, talking seriously about perhaps being an academic leader or a senior academic leader, that is one of the 10 to 15 top leaders in the institution with the most responsibility, it became apparent to me as I was contemplating that I didn't have any experience, and in fact I didn't know where to start on a fundamental aspect of being a chancellor, and that fundamental requirement was called advancement. It's termed advancement, but what that really means is raising money. Chancellors have to raise money, and I suspect in the future, given our economic difficulties and state cutbacks that seem to be continuous, that a chancellor's ability to raise money from other sources rather than from the state government might be, if not just essential, one of the very most important characteristics that search committees and governance bodies will use to pick future chancellors. When I was picked as chancellor, advancement was one of probably 5 to 8 very important components, but it wasn't first. It's not what they asked me the most about. We can talk in class what they asked me the most about. So anyway, I recognized early on that I didn't have the skills required to go to somebody's office who had a lot of money and know how to ask them the question of giving some of that money to an educational institution. Today, in 2020, I'm much better at it. And for example, I got a lot of money to run the ECU BB&T Leadership Center from private sources so that I don't have to use state money or take money away from academic programs. I got money that was a gift from several private sources that allowed us to build our leadership programs at ECU. And we can talk more about that at some point. But people that have a reputation today as being really great fundraisers seem to be able to get more opportunities than others. So in the field of education, that's certainly true. Now, there's different ways to raise money, and we can talk about that at a later time. In the field of higher education, a man named Gordon Gee, past chancellor of any number of institutions, Ohio State, West Virginia, Brown University, Vanderbilt University, and now I think he's back at West Virginia, was known as a master fundraiser. He also was known as somebody that spent $1,000 to generate $2,000. I don't know if that's a good enough return on the investment, but everybody knew who Gordon Gee was, and he seemed to have, out of 7 days in the week, Gordon often had parties 6 days a week, all with the intention of convincing people to give money to his institution. He was very good at it. In North Carolina, we had several people that were very good at giving money. I always thought that Chancellor Randy Woodson at NC State was probably the best that I ever really personally knew. I knew Randy, have known Randy very well since about 2009 or 2010, and he is a master fundraiser. He's so good that he takes ECU graduates and gets money from them before we do, and I always kidded him about that. So that's a brief introduction to what we're trying to do in these skills. I'm going to take a brief pause here, and I'll be right back. Okay, we're talking about leadership skills, and I want to now discuss why leadership skills should be important to you and why you should look at several different examples of what leadership skills are, because there's no one agreed upon list of leadership skills. These are the 4 reasons that I think are very important as you assess your own abilities. One is, to be a good leader, you have to know what your strengths are and your weaknesses are. The old saying is, you want to lead from strengths. You want to use your very best strengths to help make a positive difference, but you also want to know your weaknesses. And when you know your weaknesses, there's lots of things you can do with them. I'll say a few more words about that. But certainly you can't improve upon your weaknesses. You can't correct your weaknesses unless you know what they are. You have to really enumerate them, write them down, understand them, understand what the very best practices of that particular skill is so that you can continuously get better. Those people who are committed to step-by-step, incremental, continuous improvement usually become the very best leaders over time. Leadership is not a quick ride. It takes some time to get where you're going. So number one, I always want you to know your strengths and weaknesses. They change over time, so it's good to write them down, to chronicle them. That's one of the purposes of your journal. Okay, secondly, I want you to improve your weaknesses. As I said, I learned very early on that I really needed to get better on the advancement side. I think I did that. The primary way that I did that was to watch other people who are very good at it. My first really good advancement officer was a guy named Mickey Dowdy. He's now at a school in Virginia. He was my advancement officer for 5 or 6 years here at ECU, about 2006 to 2012 or so. And he was really good. And he taught me a lot. And he and I were on the road a lot together to try to improve the financial standing of ECU by getting more scholarship money, getting more contributions to athletics, getting more contributions to our key academic areas. All those things I learned a tremendous amount just by watching. As Yogi Berra said at one point, something like, you can observe a lot just by watching, but I changed that to you can learn a lot just by watching, and I certainly did that with Mickey. I had a student in my class last year. I try not to give names of students, but this is such a positive example. Her name will probably creep out during the course of our class this year. And in the very beginning, I was talking about the importance of class participation. And this student came up to me after class and said she just wasn't very comfortable at class participation. She didn't think that she was very good at it. And I said, it doesn't matter how good you are at it. I just want you to think about how you can contribute and what you might do to get a little better. And the next thing I knew, she was making suggestions to me by email, which was a great